The way that I would like to start in talking about your COVID project is I recognized a lot of the images from earlier bodies of work that you made. And one that really stood out to me was the one of your mother. It says Mom at Work from Family Photos and Other Stories, and which is work from your first kind of major body of work from the late 70s and early 80s. And I wanted to talk more about that picture in particular and what it meant in its various lives, like when you, at the time that you first made that body of work and what it meant to you, and then how it's evolved or become inflected differently in its later permutations, including in this COVID one.
Well, it's so interesting. I was just talking with my assistants today about, the way that I'm interested in using work, and that I've been working for a really long time now, and I have this very deep archive. I've used 1%, maybe 1% of all of the work that I've made, all of the photographs that I've made, all of the films that I've shot, all of the video that I've shot, all of the texts that I've done, right? And that the work that that surfaces is the work that you need for the time, right? It's just the work that you need for the time, and often the work that you think that you need comes out of a certain kind of an immediacy and a sort of very particular sort of project-driven mind, right? So I remember making these extraordinary pictures in Nigeria, rather in Senegal, in Mali. But I completely forgot about them, right? I mean, I made them and I looked at them, but because they weren't related to the specific project that I thought that I needed to work on at that moment, I just forgot about them. They just lived in a drawer for 40 years. And I'm actually just pulling those photographs out 40 years later, looking at them, their sort of beauty, being completely surprised that I, chose the thing that was next to it, right? As opposed to that one, that negative, that frame, because I was thinking about something else, right? And I wanted something else. And I had a different kind of expectation for my own outcome, right? And for the outcome of the project. So when I made, family pictures and stories, I made it actually, I created the piece. It was my MFA project at UCSD, University of California at San Diego. And I made it for that project. And I was very much thinking about the legacy of my family, the history of my family in relationship to notions of migration, right? Mm. How my family, arrived out of Mississippi, out of Clarksdale, into the West, into, Oregon, to Portland, Oregon. Very unique actually, because Portland has a very, very small African-American community. Indeed, for many years, African-Americans were not allowed to settle in Oregon, right? Which is why it has such a small Black population. And then, when I started work on COVID, I was looking for images that I had already made. We were under lockdown, so I couldn't go out and make anything new. The only new photographs I made were on Zoom, All my Zoom conversations have been photographed for the most part, right? Right? So I was, sort of looking through my archive, digging through my archive, and came across, not just digging in my archive. I knew immediately that there was something really important about the vitality of life displayed in the portrait of my mother, and that it was beyond my mother, that she has indeed come to mean more to me than simply being my mother. That she is sort of, she fortunately still alive. She's an amazing human being. She's a really good friend. She's a great conversationalist, and she has this extraordinary gift of openness and vitality. And in the relationship to COVID, I knew that it was a project and a photograph that I really wanted to use. And the same is true for the images that I made at MoMA, but also thinking about, similar concerns. So that, so I gathered a group of people at MoMA who had historically, I did a series of remakes of events that had happened at MoMA in the 60s and the 70s, but had historically excluded Black people, right? And so I decided that I would invite a whole group of people, all my friends, my colleagues, who fortunately come from a variety of different backgrounds, and sort of put them together in this garden to remake what MoMA did not have at the time. And so that idea, the image from COVID, "Don't worry, we'll hold hands again," started 8 years ago, of bringing people together, of bringing people into a circle to hold on to one another, right? And so to me, then that sort of underscores the work that I'm really interested in, and the ideas that I'm really interested in, and the context that I'm really interested in. How do you bring people together around issues that have historically kept them apart? How do you do that, right? How do you disrupt the normal, the norm? How do you disrupt the silos of difference? Those are the things that interest me. And it interests me whether I'm working around COVID or around my family and notions of migration and African-American history, or whether I'm working with something like From Here I Saw What Happened and I Cried. All of the work, for the most part, really has the same underpinnings at the core. And that doesn't really shift, right? Because I don't really change all that much. I learn more, right? I know more. I question myself more. But rather, I think what happens over time is that you simply grow deeper into an understanding of who you are. And therefore, the work takes on different utterance and meaning as you grow and shift and change. And so you bring that material forward in new permutations, because really the issues haven't changed.
Well, one thing that changes, and I loved the way you identified it at the beginning of your answer, is that the archive grows. The archive becomes deeper.
Yeah.
And I would love to know more about your relationship, not only to your own archive and when you recognized that as a serious part of your work that was this vast resource, but also your engagement with other kinds of archives within your work, like photographic archives. And almost as like a mode or a reservoir for you.
I think, I am by no stretch of the imagination an art historian, or a historian. I don't know anything about it. And I'm really not a great researcher as much as I sort of research and I dig around. I'm deeply curious, and so I'm always digging at things, looking at things, and pulling out things. And I save things, even though I'm not really a collector, right? And I have many things, so I'm not a collector, and I don't collect in any particular way. And yet it's all very specific, which is sort of odd, right? Like you're interested in certain kinds of things, you're interested in certain kinds of questions. And I think that, the first time that I realized that I had saved something for a really long period of time, I realized that I had saved all of my photographic notes from City College, like the first photographic classes that I had, because my teachers were so amazing. They were so skilled. They were so knowledgeable, right? That 30 years later, I was still using the ideas that they taught me for the darkroom in my darkroom, in my practice. I was still using that as a primary source of information. And so I started, sort of collecting material related to projects, I think in a sort of similar way. I mean, for me, the thing that's really sort of interesting about my practice is that I started my practice really investigating other artists. I started my practice thinking about what other artists were doing. I started my practice thinking about what was not happening in the field, right? Who were the African-American photographers? Who were the women photographers? Who were the Japanese photographers, right? Who were they? I knew that they existed somewhere out there, right? So I started doing I started collecting this material. I'd send out, notices and flyers, around the country, to libraries and to schools and colleges and friends that I thought who might know somebody, who knew somebody who could be a photographer. I mean, like I did all this work as a young person and cataloged it all, right? And carried all of that material around with me for years, and a lot of it actually I still have, right? I still have these early slides as I was really investigating and learning about the field. And then I think that, at a certain point, and I think I understood this also rather early, is that I was really interested in participating deeply within the field and really expanding the way in which the field would be understood, represented, acknowledged, considered, and who would be considered in it, right? And so that the to the extent then that I have an archive, and to the extent that I've been put an archivist, is to the extent that I've really cared about the dimensions of the field, and therefore. Knowing that I wanted to have a very strong voice within the field, I knew early that I had a unique voice within the field that needed to be heard, not so much because of who I was, but because of my interest. Because my interest had to do with all these things that existed outside of me that I thought were so important to really understanding what photography was, what representation was, who was participating in this thing, right? I mean, all of that was so exciting. So it sort of, grew out of my own natural inclination to be a participant, a serious participant in this thing. And where that comes from, I don't really know. I'm just really glad that I had it. I'm glad that it's been really useful.
Well, when you were talking about trying to establish the parameters of the field, at what did they appear to you? What appeared to you as the field at that point, and how has it changed? Like, was the field contemporary photography? Was the field the history of popular images? Was the field, the history of man-made things? Like, where were you finding yourself in that?
Primarily, of course, within the field of photography and the field of representation. Primarily. And of course, popular culture as well, since, I did a lot of work around sort of stereotypes and the stereotypes of women and different minorities and so forth. And, and I sort of continue to sort of unpack that a bit here and there. But yes, I mean, primarily it was in photography. And, and I knew it fairly well. I knew all of the major players at that time, like from Robert Frank to Gary Winogrand and Todd Pepper George and all of the boys. I knew all of the boys. I even printed for the boys, right? So I knew them in a very unique, I think, and very important way. And I knew that for the most part, African Americans were not in it, and women were not in it. And so To that extent, of course, things have changed somewhat. And contemporarily now we have a sense of the way in which the field has broadened, has opened up, has, there has been this sort of incredible and important shift in the way in which we understand who is and who is not involved in this field, this thing of contemporary artistic practice and visual practice. It's changing, I think, in sort of extraordinary ways. So maybe, 20 years ago, I knew everybody who was working, right? Anybody that, had a museum show at that time, I knew them, right? Mm-hmm. Now maybe I know maybe 10% of them, 20% of them, right? So that there are all of these wonderful, young, dynamic artists that are coming along who are, basically kicking ass and taking names. I mean, they're like making really interesting work, some of them. And some of them are, working within the commercial aspect of the field, as the field becomes more commercial in all kinds of ways. Some of the work is, just as bad as anybody else's work. You know what I mean? But there's a lot of rich work as well, and that's exciting. And it's really exciting to see. And it's, I'm very, very excited to be a part of what's taking place, to be alive and to be a witness and to look and to see and to understand the way in which the field is just sort of growing and mushrooming in all of these really interesting ways. And we'll see where that takes us, 20 years from now. I'd love to see where we are in the arts.
Mm. Well, one of the things that is staying in my mind from this earlier answer that you gave is that when one starts dealing with archival material or with an archive or with materials from the past, those things have to be saved by someone. And they don't just happen to be preserved, and it's never neutral what constitutes the frame of what gets saved and how it gets saved. And I think with a lot of your work, many of your projects have engaged precisely with that problem. How can this thing travel through time, and we can question the framework through which it's been able to travel at the same time we revisualize it. And I don't know. I'm curious about the ways in which your work has engaged with historical objects and how you think of those within the frame of an archive that both preserve them, even in some ways, when that is sometimes even insidious.
Oh, again, like something like From Here I Saw What Happened and I Cried as an example, that sort of mining of the archive in that.
Or the Hampton Project.
I'm sorry?
Or the Hampton Project.
Or the Hampton Project, right? Exactly. But of course, they do function differently,
Absolutely, absolutely.
And the ways in which the photographs themselves were meant to function, right? The photographs that, were made by, Agassiz and Zeely, right? They were meant to, function as a way of undercutting the humanity of the subject, as opposed to the Benjamin photographs that were doing exactly the opposite. So she was functioning, making those photographs for very, very, very different reasons. And I've looked at those photographs for years, the Zeely photographs for many, many years. I had them around for a long time before I decided to work with them, because I knew that they were important, but I didn't know exactly how I needed to use them. I didn't know exactly how I needed to frame them. And the same thing is true with Francis's work. I knew about the Hampton Project years before I did anything with those images, not because simply the opportunity arose, but rather because I wasn't prepared mentally, and I wasn't mature enough yet to really understand my relationship to the image, my relationship to those images, and my particular relationship to not only history, but my relationship to visual history, and how to unpack that in a way that would be critically important. And that's sort of interesting, right? That it really takes time to catch up with yourself and to really understand what something means, and therefore how to use it critically, meaningfully, and usefully so that it has a use value way beyond its intended purpose. That's what the Zealy photographs really sort of meant. And I think why I've come back to them several times before, several times, in order to sort of really think about them critically and how to position my framing in relationship to them. And so that's been a learning process, they're so brutal. They're so brutal in their making, right? So how do you take something that was meant to be dehumanizing and actually provide and give an underlying humanness to the subject? How do you undercut their meaning? And that takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of thought. So a certain time had to pass, and I needed to understand a few things before I could begin working with those images. But I think that the same is true not only for the historical images that I've used, it's also true for the images that I've made myself. Again, that they're there, that you've done the work, that you've done some of the looking, you've done some of the inquiry, but you don't yet know exactly where to place it within your story.
Well, I mean, that's such a beautiful way of talking about what you were doing with the COVID work, the COVID project. And I'm wondering what you learned about your own images from deploying them in these various modes, through billboards, through posters, through tote bags, and what pairing them with these particular images within these spatial constructs opened up to you about the images that was different than before.
I think that I understood that the work has been made with great intentionality. And therefore, the work has the ability to move across a number of different platforms and to be useful and successful within those various platforms and across those various media. And that, to me, I think is really interesting. Right? That the work has been made, and that I have worked, and that I believe in working with great intentionality. And so the representation, for instance, in We'll Hold Hands Again, was meant to do exactly the same thing when I made it 10 years ago. It's just a different context, right? And so the thing that I've learned, indeed, is that material can work if the work is imbued with great intentionality. It can be used in many different ways for many different things around the same meaning, because the meaning is ultimately the same. And the shit is, the deal is, how do we bring people together around one of the greatest pandemics of our time? How do we bring people together around the extraordinary upheaval of racism of our time? Right? How do we bring people together, right, when there is this extraordinary rupture in democracy, where we understand for the first time in a glaring way across America, right, that we are a deeply divided country along not just racial lines, but ideological lines as it pertains to race and sexism and xenophobia and homophobia, right? And the past election really sort of underscored that fact in a way that many of us did not ever think was really possible, right? That, that Trump won it all was just mind-boggling. But then that we only won the election, the Democrats only won the elections by a hair.
Is that much?
By a very, very, very thin margin, tells you really where we are in this country, that this is a great divide, that there's great schism here. And so my work has always been about that. And it doesn't change because of COVID. COVID simply underscored the depths of it. But we knew, once again, that brown people, Native Americans, African Americans, Latinx Americans were being more impacted by COVID than any other group, that inequity and inequality was showing itself in this very particular way in a pandemic, right? Or around police violence. So they're all the same. They're just simply different spokes coming off of the center core that remains sort of tightly woven around a set of issues that really matter to me.
Well, at the same time, your work is so thoughtful about its very specific context and the intervention that it has to work in. And I'm wondering, I mean, you have persistently used text and image in tandem in very complicated ways from the beginning of your life as an artist. And I'm wondering if you realize that image and text have to work differently in different kind of public contexts, or as they circulate in different kind of social spaces than they do in an exhibition space or in a book space.
I probably wouldn't have written the text like "Don't worry, we'll hold hands again" for an art piece,
right?
In quotes, right? Something that was meant to go inside of a gallery, museum context. I would not have used that language. So I'm using language in a very particular way to ride against and to cut across, I think, the images in this sort of public art context, in this public activist context, in a way that is hopefully moving people towards a very specific kind of action and a very particular kind of understanding, right? So that, for instance, around the sort of the question of the vaccine, I didn't want to tell people to take the vaccine. I didn't think that I could. I have no right to tell anybody what to do. Right? And I'm very resentful when anybody tries to tell me what to do. But I did want to sort of pose the question. And so I think to that extent, and it's like the sort of using the same strategy, that you're simply posing a set of questions, that you're not telling people what to think about a thing. Rather, you're just simply offering up a set of considerations that one might need to consider, that one might need to question, or to pose the question in a certain way to not necessarily generate answer, but maybe another set of questions that may be useful.
You spoke to this earlier, but I think it's such an important point that I want to kind of underscore it, which is you were describing the historical distance between a lot of these institutions and the communities that they are in and that they are a part of. And I think for that reason, public art often earns its bad name, partly by being very condescending in its instructions to people about what they should think or feel. And I loved the way you described avoiding all the pitfalls of that. And I would love to know more, almost as an artist and as a human being, what was it that guided your way of developing the particular language that you used and the particular images so that it could enter into people's lives, which is what happens when you put something in public, in a way that they could be receptive to, especially in a time that is so pressurized.
Yes. Well, you never know if it's going to work. You never really, really know. But you hope that it will have impact. And I just think that, it's just, again, kind of working out of a set of intentionalities and care and concern. And it's not about them. It's not over there. It's right here. It resides here. It starts with me. And what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, what I'm understanding, what I want to share with my family and my friends. Really what I want to give. And so I think that it comes Of course, I'm as vain as anybody else. I was telling somebody the other day, I have like this enormous head. I could have like this gigantic, but, but really, I just really deeply care. I care about the community that I live in. I care about the people that are around. I care about the people who actually hate me. Right? I was talking to my mother, who really has become just such a great friend. And I was working on another project. It's called Grace Notes. It was about the killing of the Emmanuel Nine, and of course, all of the killings of many, many, many young Black men, which oddly took place during the presidency of Barack Obama. That we know, of course, that the numbers really escalated, that the killings of young Black men escalated during Obama's presidency and declined when he left the presidency. Like, we know that to be a fact. And there's been sort of amazing research that's been done around this. But I was talking with my mother about grace and the meaning of grace. I made this piece, Grace Notes, but I was still battling with the idea of grace, of the meaning of grace, how to understand it. That it wasn't just like this sort of religious concept that I was trying to get at. It was something more. And so I called a number of people. I called my pastor. I called friends. I asked them what they thought about this term, grace. What was it? The word. What did it mean? And most of them came back with something really sort of, God's unmerited favor. That was grace. I mean, it was like this sort of, road thing. And then I called my mother one morning, and we had this amazing, amazing conversation that I actually go on to use in my performance because what she said and how she said it was so sort of wonderful. This idea of compassion, right? This deep sense of compassion, and to offer that compassion, to offer that gift of recognition of one's humanity, even when that person would rather see you dead, that you still offer to them an understanding of their deep humanity that you see in them. And you give that to them as a gift, that recognition as a gift, right? That they are alive, that they are human, and that your compassion and love is one of the greatest things that you can offer another. I mean, and then we went on and we talked. It was just this amazing, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful conversation with my mother. And so that idea of offering compassion to others, even when they would rather see you dead, is what I offer to the people that are around me and to my audience, and to those people that are willing to engage, and to those people that are willing not to engage. I am offering them the same level of their humanity, even when they would rather see me harmed. And this is what we see, of course, in the unraveling of the George Floyd case, right? The sort of lack of grace, that there was a refusal to see his humanity. There was a refusal to see the humanity of Black people generally in the country, which of course is the bedrock and the cornerstone of racism, right? This refusal to offer up humanity, and a refusal to move from that position of weakness in the name of power.
Well,
so yeah,
grace,
that's what I'm interested in.
Grace is such a beautiful and such a powerful way of framing it, because of course it's not something that anyone could earn or ask for, but receive. And yeah.
I have my mother to thank for this understanding of it. and what this means. I mean, this idea of offering the gift of the recognition of your humanness, regardless of your beliefs, I think is a really powerful thing, right? And that it gives you ability to situate yourself in relationship to all things. It gives you the ability to stand center and firm, not out of arrogance, out of power, but out of simply truth, out of, understanding that we are connected to the soil, and that this is this miraculous thing that we are in, this thing called life, is simply extraordinary.
Well, the thing that I appreciate so much about this project and the way you've engaged it and spoken about it is something that just recurred with increasing force over this past year was the way in which our response to COVID was when it's framed as an individual choice about your individual health, it's a failure because the decisions are not about you as an individual. They're about one's relationship to the social body and how we can live together and create a different way of being. And I think that the way you've engaged this project really addresses that so beautifully. So I also wanted to just conclude by thanking you for that.
Thank you so much. It really has been a labor of love. It's been really tough. It's been, while we've had partners, I have a small group of assistants who've worked with me tirelessly, effortlessly to make it happen. And it's been hard on them, demanding for them to keep up this work at this pace. And, and I really have to thank, initially, as I said, I started this project with so little, and all I had was time and a few ideas to bring forth, and then friends, Syracuse University stepped up in a major way immediately. They saw the value in the project, and they were the spark that allowed us to really sort of move the project forward. So it's been difficult, but it's also been, again, a great benefit and a wonderful labor of love, and a time to really think and contemplate this moment and what it has meant for me and my family and my friends, my neighbors, and for the larger world, and really thinking about how we get beyond it. And I really do believe that, now the thing that I'm just so focused on at the moment is the vaccine and the urgency of doing this, knowing that there's great hesitancy out there now, that there's been a stumble with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine that's created additional problems. We know that, people of color, even though they've been the most impacted by COVID-19, are also, a part of the, groups and cultural groups who have decided not to take the vaccine. Large portions have decided not to take the vaccine. Healthcare workers have decided not to take the vaccine. I mean, this is like really critical. So I don't know how we move to a normal state, or how we return back to some kind of normal with so many people hesitant and refusing to do, I think, the thing that is really the right thing to do. So that's the next hurdle. I thought that I was done with this, but now we're spending time trying to create some material around the importance of just acknowledging the importance of taking the vaccine, and leaving it up, of course, to individual choice at the end of the day. But I think it's going to become a problem. We already know that, the vaccine card that you receive once you've been vaccinated, people are now starting to require that you show it before you enter a store, before you return to school, before you go to the doctor, before you return to work, right? So the implications of not taking the vaccine are becoming more evident as well as we move along.
Has this moment where you've reached with this project, and I mean, the evolution of it over the past year, and I promise this is the last thing I'm going to ask you, but has it brought you to the limit of what you think art's usefulness is for addressing this kind of real pressing social problem?
That's a really interesting question. I have no money. I have no money and I have no power. So it's not that art can't function in a deeper way. It's rather that power and those in power still refuse to see art as a deep catalyst for change. And so it goes with those who are already holding the reins, right? So you go to an advertising agency, hoping that an advertising agency that has nothing to do with any community that you've ever worked with can speak to that community, right? Not only have they not worked with those communities, they've never cared about those communities, right? And so you go to an advertising agency to turn out, and you give them billions of dollars to turn out a message that has little impact, right? So I think that it's really, unfortunately, the misuse of the arts, a misunderstanding of what the arts can really do. I mean, there is no doubt in my mind that there are parts of my project that should be national, that the government should actually take it on, that it speaks in a way that no advertising agency has been able to speak yet about the moment that we find ourselves in. I mean, I think that that's really important, and it's not out of ego. It's just out of understanding of how the work actually works, right? And so it has nothing to do really, I think, with the arts. It has to do with the ways in which the limits of the society have responded historically to the arts, that we don't really understand what the arts are and how to use them, how to wield them to our need, to our end, and to our better selves. And so we chase the money, and we go after the money, and we go to people who already have the money because we think that they have the ideas and they have power. I mean, it's just so backward. It's so twisted, And so the materials I see that are being published, it's like, really? Like the ad council? So the ad council comes to me. The ad council comes to me and they want to know if they can put their materials in my materials. But they're the ones that have been given, the $1 billion contract from the federal government to run an ad campaign. Now, this is extraordinary. The ad campaign comes to me and they want to put their material with my materials. That's how they value it, right? But they haven't come back to me to say, can we move you forward? How do we take your ideas and put them in our frame, since we have the money, we have the power, and we have the clout? The government has given it to us. I mean, this is fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's really fascinating. So we're trying to sort of deal with that now. We're raising this as an issue. But again, when you have no power, right, and you're a Black woman and you have no power, right, and you've worked in the way that I've worked, for the most part, then you're not really taken that seriously, right? Or I should say that you might be taken seriously, but you're still disregarded. So it's the same thing, but it's very fascinating. I mean, I think it's really, I've learned a lot about sort of like the structure of business through doing business, and how business functions. And it doesn't come to people like me very easily, right? So how to use myself in another way, how to work possibly with the ad council is something that I've always said that for the most part, like, you can't pay for authenticity. You know what I mean? You can't package it, and you can't put a price tag on it, right? And so when you go to, like an advertising agency for authenticity, well, where are they going to get it from, right? I mean, it's not something that you can really pay for. And that's what artists bring to the world. We bring authenticity and compassion. It's work that you are already making. It's not work that somebody's going to pay you to make. It's work that you are making. It's work that you're making because you care, right? It's work that you're making because it comes out of the life that you live, the naturalness of the life that you engage, and the people that you engage, and the people that you actually want to have conversation and dialogue with. So this, I think, is, the failing of business is the failing of that sort of basic understanding. That you don't try to find people to, fit the bill. You find, you find the people that are doing it, right?
Well, it's the big problem with regarding the work an artist does as a job rather than a way of being.
Yes, and they can be both.
Yeah. And they have to be both, but they have to at least be the one.
Exactly.
You can't.
Right. I mean, it's really fascinating stuff. So listen, this is great.
We got it.
We're going to talk again.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.